Isabella Morgan stood at the window of her father's penthouse office, watching the sunset paint the Manhattan skyline in hues of gold and crimson. As the newly appointed CEO of Morgan Foods International, she should have been celebrating. Instead, her heart felt as heavy as the thick financial reports clutched in her hands. "The numbers don't lie, Isabella." Her father's voice, weak but still commanding, came from the hospital bed that now occupied one corner of his office. "Our ready meals division is bleeding money. If we don't turn it around in 6 months, we'll lose everything I've built over the last 40 years. Isabella turned to face Robert Morgan, the titan of the food industry who had built a billion-dollar empire from nothing, now looking frail against the white hospital sheets. His recent heart attack had forced him to step back, thrusting her into a role she wasn't sure she was ready for. "Dad, I understand the gravity of the situation," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But completely revamping our product line in 6 months? It's impossible." Robert interrupted, a ghost of his former sharp smile playing on his lips. "That's what my board of directors told me 30 years ago when I decided to take our small family restaurant chain national. They said I was crazy. Now look where we are." Isabella sighed, running her fingers through her dark hair. The empire her father had built was indeed impressive. Restaurants, frozen foods, catering services. But their core business, the ready meals division, had been losing market share steadily over the past 2 years. Younger consumers were abandoning their products in favor of fresher, more authentic alternatives. "The market has changed, Dad," she explained, though she knew he was well aware. "People don't want processed foods anymore. They want real, authentic." A knock at the door interrupted her. Jessica, her father's longtime assistant, poked her head in. "Ms. Morgan, the candidates for the head chef position are ready for their final tastings." Isabella had almost forgotten about the tastings. In a desperate attempt to breathe new life into their product line, they were hiring a new head of recipe development. The position had attracted hundreds of applications from prestigious chefs worldwide, all eager to work for Morgan Foods. "I'll be right there," Isabella replied, gathering her tablet and notes. Before she could leave, her father's voice stopped her. "Isabella, wait." His tone was softer now, almost vulnerable. "Remember what I always told you about success in this business?" She turned back, a small smile touching her lips. "That it's not about the food on the plate, but the story behind it." "Exactly." He nodded, his eyes intense despite his weakened state. "Find me a chef who understands that. Someone who doesn't just cook with their hands, but with their heart." The candidate tasting session was being held in the company's main test kitchen, a state-of-the-art facility that occupied the entire 42nd floor. As Isabella entered, she was greeted by the sight of 5 distinguished-looking chefs, each standing proudly behind their prepared dishes. 4 wore pristine chef whites from the world's most prestigious culinary schools. The 5th, however, caught her attention immediately. James Chen stood out like a splash of color in a black and white photograph. His chef's coat was well worn but immaculately clean, and instead of the haughty confidence displayed by the others, his expression showed a quiet intensity that intrigued her. According to his application, he ran a small but popular food truck in Brooklyn, a far cry from the Michelin-starred restaurants his competitors hailed from. The tasting began with the first 4 chefs presenting their dishes, each one more elaborate than the last. Beautiful plates with exotic ingredients and complex techniques, accompanied by lengthy explanations about molecular gastronomy and cutting-edge culinary trends. Isabella could appreciate their skill, but something was missing. These dishes, while impressive, felt soulless. Then came James's turn. He placed a simple bowl in front of her, steam rising gently from its contents. "This is my grandmother's congee," he said simply, his voice quiet but confident, with a few modern touches. Isabella looked down at the dish, a far cry from the artistic presentations that had preceded it. The rice porridge was garnished simply with fresh herbs, a perfectly cooked egg, and what appeared to be house-made chili oil. Mr. Chen, one of the board members spoke up, his tone dismissive. We're looking for innovative dishes that can revolutionize our product line, not home cooking. James remained unruffled. With respect, sir, I believe what people are really hungry for is exactly this: authentic food that tells a story and connects them to something real. Isabella lifted a spoonful to her lips, and the moment the congee touched her tongue, something extraordinary happened. The flavors were perfectly balanced: the comfort of the rice porridge, the richness of the egg, the kick of the chili oil. But it was more than that. Each bite evoked memories of family dinners, of comfort on cold days, of home. This chili oil, she said, taking another bite. It's different from any I've had before. James nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It's my secret ingredient. Something I discovered by accident while experimenting in my food truck. It enhances the natural flavors of the food while adding its own subtle complexity. As Isabella continued eating, she couldn't help but notice how James's eyes lit up when he talked about his food. There was none of the rehearsed precision of the other chefs. Instead, there was passion, authenticity, and something else she couldn't quite name. What she didn't know then was that this moment would change not just her company's future, but her life in ways she could never have imagined. The secret ingredient in James's chili oil would indeed turn out to be revolutionary, but the real revolution would have less to do with flavors and more to do with the heart. Looking up from the empty bowl, Isabella made a decision that would shock the board members and set in motion a chain of events that would either save Morgan Foods or destroy it completely. "Mr. Chen," she said, setting down her spoon, "I think we need to talk. If you want to uncover the secret that will change the fate of Isabella and Morgan Foods, don't go anywhere. What's coming will surprise you." The boardroom erupted in chaos the moment Isabella announced her decision to hire James Chen as Morgan Foods' new head of recipe development. The mahogany table that had witnessed countless corporate battles now hosted perhaps its most heated discussion yet. "Ms. Morgan, with all due respect, this is madness." Marcus Sterling, the longest-serving board member, practically spat the words. "We're talking about a food truck operator with no corporate experience, no formal culinary education beyond a community college degree, and absolutely no understanding of mass production." Isabella stood her ground, her posture straight and confident despite the rising tension in the room. What Mr. Chen lacks in corporate experience, he makes up for in innovation and authenticity. Exactly what our market research shows consumers are demanding. "Innovation," another board member scoffed. "His signature dish is rice porridge. His signature dish made me feel something," Isabella countered, her voice firm. "When was the last time any of our products did that?" The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in that room knew the truth. Morgan Foods had lost its soul in the pursuit of efficiency and profit margins. Their products were scientifically formulated to be palatable, but they had forgotten the most important ingredient: heart. Meanwhile, in the test kitchen several floors below, James Chen was already at work. Isabella had given him carte blanche to experiment, and he wasn't wasting any time. The kitchen staff watched with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism as he unpacked his supplies, including several unmarked bottles of his mysterious chili oil. Chef Chen, one of the senior food scientists, approached him, clipboard in hand. "We'll need the complete ingredient list for your condiment for regulatory purposes." James looked up from his prep work, his eyes showing a flash of hesitation before he smiled politely. "Of course, I'll provide everything necessary for approval, but the exact formula is my personal recipe." The scientist frowned. "Mr. Chen, you're now an employee of Morgan Foods. Any recipes you develop belong to the company." "The base recipe, yes," James agreed, "but my secret ingredient, that's something else entirely." Word of this exchange made its way back to Isabella, who was leaving yet another tense meeting with the board. She found herself heading to the test kitchen, drawn not just by concern over the potential conflict, but by something else she wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. She found James alone in the kitchen, surrounded by various pots and ingredients. The sleeves of his chef's coat were rolled up, revealing strong forearms marked with old burn scars, badges of honor in his profession. He was so focused on his work that he didn't notice her entrance. "You know," she said, causing him to look up, "most people would be intimidated on their first day at a billion-dollar company, but here you are, already causing waves." James wiped his hands on his apron, his expression serious. "Ms. Morgan, Isabella," she corrected him. "Isabella," he continued, "I need to be honest with you. I took this job because I believe in what you said about wanting to bring real food, real stories to people. But my secret ingredient, it's not just about protecting a recipe, it's about protecting a promise." She moved closer, intrigued. The kitchen smelled amazing, a complex blend of spices and aromatics that made her mouth water. "What kind of promise?" James was quiet for a moment, stirring something in a pot before responding. "My grandmother was more than just a great cook. She was an herbalist, a keeper of ancient knowledge. Before she passed away, she made me promise to protect her secrets, to only share them with someone who would understand their true value." Isabella felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in his voice, a depth of emotion that resonated with her own complicated relationship with family legacy. "Your grandmother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," James smiled, then gestured to the pot. "Would you like to try what I'm working on? It's a modern take on her braised beef recipe." Isabella didn't hesitate. The moment the spoon touched her lips, she was transported. The meat was tender, practically melting in her mouth, but it was the sauce that stunned her. It had depth, complexity, but also something else. A warmth that seemed to spread through her entire body. "This is incredible," she breathed. The flavors are so distinct, yet they work together perfectly. And that warmth at the end, that's the secret ingredient," James said softly, watching her reaction closely. "My grandmother called it heart's fire, not just because of the heat, but because she said it had the power to warm people's hearts." Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. Isabella felt something shift in the air between them, a connection that went beyond employer and employee, beyond even their shared passion for food. The moment was broken by the sharp click of heels on tile. Jessica, Isabella's assistant, rushed in, her face taut with concern. "Ms. Morgan, you need to see this immediately," she said, holding out her tablet. "Someone leaked Mr. Chen's appointment to the press, and the market reaction, it's not good." Isabella took the tablet, her heart sinking as she read the headlines. "Morgan Foods stocks plummet as heiress hires unknown food truck operator, and has Isabella Morgan lost her mind? Board members question latest decision." But it was the last headline that made her blood run cold. Former associates question James Chen's past. What is he hiding? Looking up, she caught James's expression, a mixture of concern and something else. Something that made her wonder if there was more to his story than he'd revealed. The secret ingredient in his sauce might be just one of many mysteries surrounding James Chen, and Isabella realized she had staked not just her company's future, but her own reputation on a man she barely knew. The warmth of his remarkable food still lingered on her tongue, but now it was mixed with the bitter taste of doubt. Had she let her heart override her judgment? And more importantly, what would she discover if she started digging into James Chen's past? Are you enjoying this story of love, mystery, and overcoming challenges? Subscribe to not miss out on stories like this every day. The headlines about James Chen's mysterious past had sparked a firestorm that threatened to consume everything Isabella had worked for. As she sat in her office late that evening, surrounded by preliminary reports from the private investigators she'd been forced to hire, her father's words echoed in her mind, "Find me a chef who cooks with their heart." But now she wondered, what else might be hiding in that heart? The reports painted a peculiar picture. James Chen seemed to appear out of nowhere 5 years ago. His food truck, Chen's Fusion, had quickly become a Brooklyn sensation. But before that, nothing. No social media presence, no previous employment records, not even a trace of the grandmother he spoke about so fondly. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. James stood there, still in his chef's coat, looking exhausted but determined after another long day in the test kitchen. "You've been avoiding me," he said simply, stepping into the office. Isabella gestured for him to sit down. "The media storm. It's worse than we anticipated. The stock has dropped 15% in 3 days. The board is demanding answers about your background." James's expression remained calm, but she noticed his hands tighten slightly on the armrests of his chair. "What do you want to know?" "The truth would be a good start," Isabella replied, pushing aside the reports. "Who are you really, James Chen?" He was quiet for a long moment. His eyes focused on the Manhattan skyline, visible through her office windows. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with memories. "My real name is James Chen Wu. I changed it, simplified it when I came to America. The grandmother I told you about, she wasn't just an herbalist. She was the keeper of a culinary tradition that goes back centuries. My family's restaurant in Hong Kong was famous, not for its luxury or sophistication, but for its healing food." Isabella leaned forward, intrigued despite her reservations. "Healing food? Food that doesn't just feed the body, but nurtures the soul. My grandmother's secret ingredient, it's not just about flavor. It's about connection, about awakening memories and emotions that help people heal. But why the secrecy? Why hide all this?" James's expression darkened. 5 years ago, a large corporation tried to buy our restaurant. They wanted our recipes, particularly my grandmother's secret ingredient. When we refused to sell, they began reverse engineering our dishes, trying to steal what had been in our family for generations. His voice cracked slightly. The stress of it all. It was too much for my grandmother. After she passed, I took her last bottle of the ingredient and left Hong Kong. I promised her I would protect our legacy until I found the right place, the right people to share it with. Isabella felt her throat tighten with emotion. "And you think Morgan Foods is that place?" "I thought," he paused, meeting her eyes, "I thought you were that person. When I first saw the job posting, I researched you. I saw how you fought to maintain quality when others wanted to cut corners. How you tried to keep the human touch in a corporate world. You reminded me of my grandmother." Before Isabella could respond, her office door burst open. Marcus Sterling strode in, followed by 2 other board members, their faces flushed with triumph. "We've found it," Sterling announced, waving a tablet. "The real reason Mr. Chen has been so secretive. Did you know, Ms. Morgan, that your pet chef here was involved in industrial espionage in Hong Kong?" James stood up so quickly, his chair nearly toppled. "That's not true," Sterling continued, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "According to these reports, James Chen Wu was accused of stealing proprietary recipes from Global Foods Corporation's Asian division. They were developing a revolutionary flavor enhancer, and suddenly their lead food scientist disappears along with all their research." Isabella felt the room spinning. Global Foods, one of their biggest competitors. The implications were staggering. "Is this true?" she asked James, hating how her voice wavered. "The accusations were false," James replied, his face pale but determined. "Global Foods stole from us, not the other way around. They couldn't replicate my grandmother's recipe, so they tried to destroy our reputation instead. They're the reason I had to leave Hong Kong." Sterling scoffed. "A convenient story, but we can't risk everything on the word of a man who's already lied about his identity. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. We'll be voting on whether to terminate Mr. Chen's contract and possibly discuss a change in leadership." The threat was clear. Isabella's position as CEO was now in jeopardy as well. After Sterling and the others left, a heavy silence fell over the office. James stood by the window, his reflection ghostly in the darkened glass. "I should have told you everything from the beginning," he said quietly. "But I was afraid. Afraid that a big corporation would once again try to steal what my grandmother protected her whole life." Isabella walked over to stand beside him, their reflections merging in the glass. Your secret ingredient, is it really that revolutionary? James turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw both fear and determination. It's more than that. It's the key to bringing soul back to processed food. My grandmother discovered a way to preserve not just flavors, but feelings. The warmth, the comfort, the memories, they stay intact even after packaging and reheating. That's what global foods couldn't replicate. That's what they're still trying to steal. As if to prove his point, he pulled a small bottle from his pocket, the same one he'd been using in all his test kitchen creations. The liquid inside seemed to shimmer in the dim light. This is the last of my grandmother's original batch, he said softly. I've learned to make more, but it's never quite the same. Her version, it was perfect. Isabella stared at the bottle, understanding finally dawning. This wasn't just about recipes or market share. This was about legacy, family, and the kind of magic that science couldn't explain. But before she could respond, a commotion outside her office caught their attention. Through the glass walls, they could see security guards approaching, led by Marcus Sterling. They're coming to escort you out, Isabella realized with horror. They're not even waiting for tomorrow's meeting. James quickly pressed the bottle into her hands. Keep it safe, he whispered. If you still believe in me, if you still believe in what food should be, you'll know what to do. As the security guards entered the office, Isabella clutched the bottle, feeling its warmth against her palm. In 12 hours, she would face a board vote that could end her career. Her father's legacy, her own dreams, and now James's family secret, everything hung in the balance. And somewhere in that small bottle she held might be the key to saving it all, or losing everything. James's past is about to be revealed. If this story is exciting you, hit like to support us. Isabella spent the night in her father's office, the small bottle of James's secret ingredient clutched in her hands as she paced the floor. Robert Morgan watched her from his hospital bed, his expression thoughtful as she recounted everything that had happened. So, he said finally, his voice weak but clear, you have to choose between protecting this man's family secret and saving our company. It's not that simple, Dad. Isabella stopped pacing, sinking into a chair beside his bed. I've tasted what James can create. His food, it's different from anything I've ever experienced. If what he says about global foods is true, if they really did try to steal his grandmother's recipe, then they know its true value, her father finished. He was quiet for a moment, studying his daughter's face. You care about him, don't you? Beyond his cooking. Isabella felt her cheeks warm. Dad, that's not... Isabella, he interrupted gently. I've watched you run this company for the past months. You've made tough decisions, smart decisions, but this is the first time I've seen you fight for something with your heart as well as your head. She looked down at the bottle in her hands. In the dim light, the liquid seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The board meeting is in 4 hours. They're going to vote to remove both James and me. Everything you built, what I built, Robert Morgan said firmly, was never about the money. It was about bringing people together through food. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. Before Isabella could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. Her heart stopped as she read it. Global Foods, she whispered. They're making a move to buy out our major shareholders. If they succeed, they'll control the company, her father finished, his face grim. And they'll have whatever James has been protecting. Isabella stood up abruptly, a plan forming in her mind. Dad, I need your help and your trust. 2 hours later, Isabella walked into the Morgan Foods test kitchen. She had expected it to be empty at this early hour, but she found James there, methodically cleaning equipment that he might never use again. James, she called softly. He turned, surprise flickering across his face. Isabella, I thought security... I convinced them to let me in. We need to talk. She held up his bottle. I spent all night thinking about this, about what it means. I need you to tell me everything about how it works. James hesitated. Isabella, it's not safe for you to be involved. Global Foods. They don't just want the recipe, they want to synthesize it, mass produce it. They don't understand that it can't be manufactured in a lab. Then help me understand, she pressed. Show me! Something in her voice must have convinced him. James took the bottle, handling it with reverence. Watch, he said, opening it carefully. The aroma that filled the kitchen was subtle but profound. Isabella felt warmth spread through her chest, like being wrapped in a loving embrace. The base is a blend of oils and herbs, James explained, adding a few drops to a small pot of simmering water. But the secret, the real magic, it's about intention. My grandmother taught me that when you cook with love, with purpose, it changes the food at its core. This ingredient amplifies that connection. As he spoke, he began to cook, moving with practiced grace. Isabella watched, mesmerized, as he prepared a simple soup, the kitchen filled with steam and fragrance. But there was something else too, a feeling, an energy she couldn't explain. Every batch has to be prepared with a specific person in mind, James continued. My grandmother made this one thinking of family, of the bonds that connect us across generations. That's why it works so well in comfort foods, dishes that remind people of home. Isabella took a spoonful of the soup he offered her. The flavor was extraordinary, but it was the feeling that overwhelmed her. Memories of Sunday dinners with her father, of learning to cook at her mother's side before she passed away, of all the love that food could carry. Tears sprang to her eyes. This is what we've been missing, not just at Morgan Foods, but in the whole industry. We've forgotten that food is about connection, about love. James nodded solemnly. James, that's why I couldn't let Global Foods have it. They would strip away everything that makes it special, turn it into just another artificial additive. Isabella checked her watch. 1 hour until the board meeting. She looked at James, her decision made. I have a plan, she said, but I need you to trust me completely. And I need you to make one more batch. It takes hours to prepare properly, James protested. The board meeting won't start without me, Isabella said firmly. And I need this batch to be special. I need you to make it thinking of growth, of change, of the courage to choose a new path. James studied her face for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. Tell me what you need. As James began to work, Isabella made several urgent phone calls. With each one, her plan took shape, but she knew she was taking an enormous risk. If she was wrong about any part of this, she would lose everything. The company, her reputation, and most importantly, James's trust. The final call was to Marcus Sterling. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I know about the deal you've been negotiating with Global Foods behind my back. I know they promised you a position on their board if you helped them take over Morgan Foods. She heard his sharp intake of breath. Ms. Morgan, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I want you to move the board meeting to the main test kitchen, she interrupted. And I want you to invite the Global Foods representatives who are in town. It's time we put all our cards on the table. After she hung up, she turned to find James watching her, his hands covered in herbs and oils, the new batch of his secret ingredient slowly coming to life on the stove. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. Isabella moved closer, taking in the scent of his creation. Spicy, warm, but with something else, something that made her feel brave and hopeful. My father always said that success in this business isn't about the food on the plate, but the story behind it, she replied. It's time to tell our story, James. All of it. As they worked side by side in the kitchen, preparing for what was to come, Isabella felt a certainty she hadn't experienced since taking over the company. In less than an hour, she would either save Morgan Foods and protect James's legacy, or lose everything she held dear. But with the warmth of James's secret ingredient filling the air, and his quiet strength beside her, she was ready to face whatever came next. The real magic, she was beginning to understand, wasn't just in the bottle. It was in the courage to fight for what you believe in, and the wisdom to recognize what truly matters. The most important decision is coming up. Subscribe now to not miss the thrilling conclusion. The Morgan Foods Test Kitchen had never hosted a board meeting before. As board members filed in, their expressions ranging from confused to annoyed, Isabella stood calmly behind a long table laden with covered dishes. James worked quietly beside her, putting the finishing touches on their preparations. Marcus Sterling entered last, accompanied by two men in expensive suits, the Global Foods executives. Their presence caused a stir among the board members, but Isabella simply smiled, noting how Sterling avoided her gaze. "Thank you all for accommodating this change of venue," Isabella began, her voice steady. "Before we vote on the future of Morgan Foods, I believe we need to have a real conversation about what this company stands for and what certain people will do to destroy that." She nodded to James, who began uncovering the dishes they'd prepared. The aromas that filled the room were extraordinary, causing several board members to lean forward unconsciously. "What is this?" Sterling demanded. "We're here to vote on Mr. Chen's termination and my removal as CEO," Isabella finished. "Yes, I know. I also know about your secret meetings with Global Foods, Mr. Sterling, about their plans to acquire Morgan Foods, strip it for parts, and mass-produce their version of what they think makes our new recipes special." The Global Foods executives shifted uncomfortably as murmurs spread through the room. Isabella continued, her voice growing stronger. "But before anyone votes, I want you to understand exactly what's at stake. Mr. Chen, would you explain what we've prepared?" James stepped forward, his quiet confidence filling the space. "Before you are 5 dishes. Each represents a pivotal moment in Morgan Foods' history, reimagined with a key difference." He gestured to the first dish. "This is Robert Morgan's original meatloaf, the recipe that launched this company 40 years ago." Isabella watched as board members sampled the dish, their eyes widening in surprise. One elderly board member, who had been with the company since the beginning, had tears in his eyes. "It tastes just like," he whispered, "just like when Robert first made it for us." "How is this possible?" James moved to the next dish. "Here we have Morgan's classic comfort line, reformulated with our new approach. And here," he pointed to the remaining dishes, "are prototypes for an entirely new line of ready meals that could revolutionize the industry." As the board members tasted each dish, Isabella could see the change in their expressions. These weren't just good meals, they were experiences. Each bite bringing back memories, creating connections, stirring emotions that no mass-produced food had ever achieved. "This is why Global Foods has been so desperate to acquire us," Isabella declared. "They know what we've created here is revolutionary, but they don't understand that it can't be replicated in a laboratory or mass-produced without care and intention." One of the Global Foods executives stood up, straightening his tie. "Ms. Morgan, whatever proprietary ingredient you're using is not for sale," she interrupted firmly. "And neither is Morgan Foods." She turned to address the board directly. "What James Chen brought to our company isn't just a secret ingredient. He reminded us of what my father built this company on, the belief that food is about more than profit margins and market share. It's about connection, about family, about love." The boardroom doors opened suddenly and a familiar figure appeared, supported by a nurse. Robert Morgan, still in his hospital clothes, made his way slowly to the front of the room. "Dad," Isabella breathed, "you shouldn't be here." "Like hell I shouldn't," he said, his voice weak but determined. "This is my life's work we're talking about." He turned to face the board. "I've watched from my hospital bed as my daughter fought to save the soul of this company. I've tasted what she and James have created together. This isn't just about recipes or ingredients. It's about remembering why we started this company in the first place." Robert Morgan reached for one of the dishes, taking a small bite. His eyes filled with tears. This tastes like your mother's cooking, Isabella, like Sunday dinners when you were little." He looked at James with newfound respect. "You've done what I always dreamed of, found a way to put love itself into our food." Sterling stood up, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous. We're running a business, not a family kitchen. The global foods offer will be declined." A voice rang out. It was Helen Chen, one of the oldest board members. She stood, her spine straight despite her years. "I've been on this board for 30 years, and I've never tasted anything like this. This is what we've been missing, what our customers have been craving. Not just good food, but food with heart." One by one, other board members began to nod in agreement. The global foods executives exchanged glances and quietly left the room, recognizing their defeat. Sterling, seeing his plan crumbling, stormed out after them. "I move," Helen Chen continued, "that we not only retain James Chen, but promote him to Chief Innovation Officer, working directly with CEO Isabella Morgan to implement this new direction company-wide." The vote was unanimous. As the board members filed out, many stopping to congratulate them, Isabella turned to James. "Chief Innovation Officer Chen," she said with a smile. "How does that sound?" But James wasn't looking at his new title or the celebrating board members. He was looking at her, his eyes filled with something that made her heart skip. "You risked everything," he said softly. "Your position, your father's company. Why?" Isabella stepped closer to him, the warmth of the kitchen and the lingering aromas of their food surrounding them. "Because you reminded me that some things are worth fighting for. Some things can't be bought or sold or mass-produced. Some things, like love," he finished, taking her hand. "Like love," she agreed. Robert Morgan watched them from across the kitchen, a knowing smile on his face. He had always said success in the food business was about the story behind the food. And here was the greatest story of all, how a billionaire's daughter and a chef with a secret recipe had saved his company by remembering its heart. 6 months later, Morgan Foods launched its new heritage line of ready meals. Each package contained a QR code linking to the story behind the recipe, tales of family traditions, lost loved ones, and rediscovered connections. Sales skyrocketed as customers found themselves not just buying food, but sharing in stories of love and memory. James's secret ingredient remained just that, a secret. But its true magic wasn't in its formula. It was in the way it reminded people that food could be more than sustenance, that a simple meal could carry the weight of love, memory, and connection. And in the test kitchen where it all began, now expanded and renovated into Morgan Foods Innovation Center, Isabella and James worked side by side, creating not just new recipes, but new stories. Their wedding cake, when they finally married a year later, was a simple creation that tasted of joy, of triumph over adversity, and of love that, like the perfect recipe, had come together when all the right ingredients found each other at exactly the right time. Morgan Foods had been saved not by corporate strategies or market analysis, but by remembering that the most important ingredient in any recipe is the heart that creates it. And in that lesson was a truth that no competitor could ever replicate. That true success, like true love, comes not from what you can take, but from what you're willing to give. The secret ingredient, it turned out, had been love all along. Not just in the bottle James's grandmother had left him, but in the courage to trust, the wisdom to stay true to one's values, and the faith to believe that when you cook with love, extraordinary things are possible. Do you think Isabella made the right choice by risking everything for love? What would you have done in her place? Choose love or the security of the family empire? If this story touched your heart, hit like and subscribe. Your support allows us to continue sharing stories that inspire and move every day.